assert its constitutional responsibility and make clear that the power of war-making rests with the United States Congress, not with a president, whether that president is a Republican or a Democrat, and that our unauthorized engagement in the war in Yemen must end.
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. The Struggle is shown on over 30 cable stations from Maine to New York City. Last week, 70 human rights advocates in New York City gathered in a noisy musical protest in front of Carnegie Hall to demonstrate against an extravagant fundraising brunch and performance by the Israel Philharmonic Orchestra. The Philharmonic is a self-proclaimed cultural ambassador representing the state of Israel, trying to orchestrate a positive image of Israel to divert attention from its human rights abuses as part of the Brand Israel initiative launched in 2006. An Israeli Foreign Ministry official explained Israeli government efforts to rebrand Israel through the arts, saying, "We will send well-known novelists and writers overseas, theater companies, exhibits to show Israel's prettier face, so we are not thought of purely in the context of war." Protesters distributed flyers with the message, "Don't harmonize with apartheid." Signs included one saying, "Israel fiddles while Palestine burns," while another one calls for justice presto, not lento. The protest was led by Adalah-NY, a group that campaigns for boycotts, divestments, and sanctions, BDS. On social media, it called to protest Israel art washing, saying apartheid is out of tune.
We protest, boycott, sanctions, and divest. In white waters, we protest, boycott, sanctions, and divest. Continue. We will continue. Call for a cultural boycott. For a cultural boycott against Israeli institutions. Against Israeli institutions that are complicit. That are complicit in Israel's violation. In Israel's violation of Palestinian human rights. Of Palestinian human rights. And violations. And violations of international law. Of international law.
I'll be speaking with Iannis Delatolas, who is in New York City, and he is helping plan an anti-fascist rally. He's Greek-American, I believe, and we'll get into it right away. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
All right. Was I correct in my introduction first?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. So tell us about what's coming up in March.
On March 16, there will be a series of protests in possibly up to 22 countries to demonstrate and organize an international response to the rise of the far right and fascism that we have been seeing both in Europe and in the U.S. These demonstrations used to happen since 2013. At the time, there were solidarity actions with the anti-fascist movement in Greece that was fighting against the neo-Nazi party Golden Dawn. But as we have seen since the Trump election, an international resurgence of racism that has emboldened the far right and the neo-Nazis to organize, as we witnessed in the United States in the last 2 years, but also in Europe. So this is what brought us together in New York City to form United Against Racism and Fascism, NYC. It's a broad coalition, people who come from very different political backgrounds, socialists from the Green Party, anarchists, and even some Hillary supporters, people who voted for Hillary. Particularly one group called Rise and Resist, which has a very good anti-racist record, standing up for the migrants. They demonstrated against the separation of children at the border.
Now, I know you have very limited time today, so is there a location for the rally in New York City?
Yes, it's going to be on March 16. It's a Saturday, and we're meeting at noon at Foley Square in Manhattan.
Mm-hmm. And there's planning meetings this weekend, is that right?
Yes, our next public meeting is this Saturday at 1 p.m. at the UAW Hall, and that is at 256 West 38th Street on the 12th floor. And it's an open meeting.
And before I let you go, what is the situation with Greece in terms of fascism?
It's an ongoing battle. The trial has entered the second phase, where we will probably find out, I don't know, in a few months.
Well, what trial? What trial?
Oh, I'm sorry. The leadership of Golden Dawn is facing a trial for orchestrating attacks against migrants, and also for the murder of the hip-hop artist Pablos Fisas. This trial has been going on for a few years now. It's dragging, which is, not good due to the government's lack of resolve in Greece. But I think this year we're going to have some verdicts.
Mm-hmm. And what about on the ground? Is Golden Dawn growing or declining?
Well, I think that overall the rallies are small. They have tried to use the Macedonia issue, the name of the use of the name of Macedonia. The far right has tried to organize rallies against that and tried to bring themselves back, but they haven't really succeeded in bringing large numbers of people to those rallies. So the anti-fascist movement is active, and is keeping them in a position of isolation for the moment being.
Last question. We covered with a section about the Greek teachers' strike and big demonstrations. Then we kind of lost sight of it. Is it still going on, or what's going?
No, that strike has ended, but coming up on March 8th for International Women's Day, a new initiative has been started that is led by women. And the public sector union has endorsed this strike. It's going to happen. It's going to be a strike led by women on Women's International Day. So that's the next exciting news coming out of Greece.
All right. Thank you so much for talking.
A comment about the State of the Union address. President Trump claimed an unprecedented economic boom and economic miracle. What is the miracle? Yeah, stock prices did go up, but what about employees? What about workers? 157 million people. How are they doing? Take a look at pay increases minus price increases, what economists call the real wage. Trump's Bureau of Labor Statistics tells the tale. In his first year of office, the real weekly wage rose 0.8%. In the second year, a little more, 1.2%. A grand total of 2% for his years in office. Is that a miracle? We know from Pew Research that over the last 40 years, workers' real wages have barely increased. Now compare that to China. Chinese workers. Economist Richard Wolff points out that just in the last dozen years, their wage, the real wage, in China has quadrupled, meaning it doubled and it doubled again, a 400% rise. Here's a couple graphs. Let's look at the 2% raise achieved over the last couple years. Looks fat on this graph. But now let's compare it to what Chinese workers received. Now that 2% looks kind of pitiful. A few days before AOC and other important members of Congress rolled out a Green New Deal plan, there was a meeting in New Haven on the subject, including speakers from the youthful Sunrise Movement and the New Haven Leon Sister City Project. Nora Heaphy, a Yale student, spoke about Sunrise.
As we did in Nancy Pelosi's office when we all showed up, to demand that she actually put together some sort of committee that actually had some teeth.
We have 12 years to radically transform our economy and our society to stop this crisis and protect human civilization as we know it. We'll talk about it like that because that's what it is.
Should Leader Pelosi become the next Speaker of the House, we've got her back in pursuing the most progressive energy agenda that this country has ever seen.
But we also need political power because, as we've all seen in the past few years, our movements have accomplished huge things, have turned hundreds of thousands of people out to rallies, marches, broken, every record in terms of people and direct action and protests. And then in 2016, political power was really not part of our strategy. Electoral organizing of the youth climate movement was not a focus. And we lost big. So we also need elected officials who are not beholden to the fossil fuel industry to pass these policies, because so much needs to change right now. We need to transform our entire economy and transportation and agriculture, and a lot of that needs to happen at the federal level with legislation. So we really need to make sure that we are kicking out politicians who take money from big oil and replacing them with leaders who will fight for the health and well-being of our generation.
Now a bit of Chris Schweitzer's remarks.
I work with a group called New Haven Leon Sister City Projects, and most of our work's in Nicaragua. We work with rural communities. One was displaced by Hurricane Mitch in 1998, so we got involved in climate change about 10 years ago because of that threat for increasing droughts and heat waves and hurricanes. And the average family where we work makes about $1,500 a year, so things like droughts and hurricanes are a complete disaster. So we're extremely anxious about climate change and what it means for the communities we work with. And these are folks from a climate justice perspective to not create this problem. And this is really ours to take on and create a much better world for everybody, but we really need to get on it and move. These are just some general goals when we think about a Connecticut Green New Deal. So there's already, I think, 30 representatives in Connecticut who've signed on to support a Green New Deal. There's no language yet, but they have a placeholder bill in Hartford. There's one attorney who works with the Connecticut Fund for the Environment who's already been asked to help decide what's in there. So part of this presentation is just to throw out some ideas about what possibly could be in there. But I think that's part of the ongoing discussion coming up, is how to create that and also build a movement to make that happen, because there's a lot of pushback in Hartford, I'm sure, from auto industry and oil industry, and all the usual suspects are going to push back hard on this. Some of the goals that I would put out there is, recognize climate change as a crisis. It's just off to the side of the mainstream agenda. It needs to be part of the crisis as a crisis. Develop a specific plan to respond to the emergency. The proposals in Connecticut right now for climate change and energy are all nice. Shared solar, some more transportation money, but they're all very mild. And generally, in Connecticut, it takes about 3 years to get a bill passed. And this is just totally unacceptable. We need like a whole package of bills going through at once to really have the impact, the scale we need, and soon. We need the state to play a role in, this is a real problem, and we need the government to play a significant role in resolving that problem. And that's part of that is recognizing that there is a critical role. There's a lot of free market talk or let capitalism work and all that stuff. Clearly, industry is watching itself get overwhelmed by this crisis, and it has no way to respond to something except to make more short-term profit. So we need government which is following the national lead. We need government to step in, as Roosevelt did in the 1930s, as the government did during World War II, and have a mobilization and use their power at the national level and state level to make things happen. And just saying, people think, what can the states do? Governor Malloy proposed in 2012 borrowing $90 billion to upgrade the transportation system in Connecticut. Bigger 91, 95, more trains, more buses, bike lanes. But if a governor could propose borrowing $92 billion and not be laughed out of Hartford, clearly they could do that for climate change. So over the next 7 years, we're going to spend $90 billion and do the work we need to do to make these things happen. So it's not a money question, doesn't seem. It seems like it's a matter of getting a good plan, getting it going, and making it happen. And also, just to say, part of this is structuring an economy in a way that gets away from the bad parts of capitalism, where you just don't pay attention to what we're doing to the environment, right? We can't just try to use the Green New Deal and have a bigger, greener capitalism. There's just not going to work the way we just don't pay attention to the negative impacts. I know I'm going fast, but there's a lot to go through. So the reason, these are something from another group down at the bottom that just put these out, and this is some of the stuff that Sunrise is talking about. They're all good things, and it's also definitely feasible and necessary. And that's true for Connecticut. Connecticut spends over $4 billion a year importing fossil fuels from Saudi Arabia and from Texas, and we could have our own energy industry here and producing our own energy through solar and wind and save a lot of energy from energy efficiency and better transportation. So that's all good economically and very doable.
In Saudi news, the New York Times reports that U.S. intelligence officials released an intercept they did in 2017, in which it is heard that Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince, talked to his aides and said that if they couldn't convince Khashoggi to be silent, he'd use a bullet to get the job done. In other Saudi news, CNN reports that Saudi Arabia has transferred U.S. weapons to Al-Qaeda in an effort to get that group and other extremist factions in Yemen to do the Saudi bidding. But a wonderful friend and dear ally we have in Saudi Arabia. But they enrich the weapons-making corporations, so what the hey? You'll see video now from Congress, Senator Sanders and other senators talking about attempts to use legislation to end the U.S.-Saudi war on Yemen.
In March of 2015, as you know, under the leadership of Mohammed bin Salman, who was Saudi's defense minister at the time and is now the crown prince, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates intervened in Yemen's ongoing civil war. The result of the Saudi-led intervention has been the creation of the worst humanitarian crisis in modern history. According to the United Nations, the war in Yemen could lead to the most severe famine in more than 100 years, with some 100 million people at risk of starvation in one of the poorest countries on earth as a result of this war. According to the aid organization Save the Children, some 85,000 children in Yemen have already died of starvation, and millions more face death if this horrible war continues. Further, Yemen is currently experiencing the worst cholera outbreak in the world, with as many as 10,000 new cases each week, according to the World Health Organization. This is a disease spread by infected water that causes severe diarrhea and dehydration and will only accelerate the death rate. The cholera outbreak has occurred because Saudi bombs have destroyed Yemen's water infrastructure and people no longer have access to clean water. Late last year, I had the opportunity to meet with several very brave human rights activists from Yemen, urging Congress to put a stop to this war. And they told me very clearly, when Yemenis see "Made in USA" on the bombs that are killing them, it tells them that the United States of America is responsible for this war. This is not a message the United States should be sending to the world. The United States should not be supporting a catastrophic war led by a despotic Saudi regime with a dangerous and irresponsible military policy. On December 13th, 2018, just over a month ago, a majority of the United States Senate agreed with that proposition and voted to end U.S. support for the Saudi-led war in Yemen. My colleagues, Mike Lee, Republican of Utah, Chris Murphy, a Democrat of Connecticut, and I brought together Republicans and Democrats in a very historic moment. For the first time, 45 years after the passage of the War Powers Act, the United States Senate came together to reassert its constitutional responsibility and make clear that the power of war-making rests with the United States Congress, not with a president, whether that president is a Republican or a Democrat, and that our unauthorized engagement in the war in Yemen must end. What the United States Senate said in no uncertain terms is that we will not continue to have our military posture dictated by a despotic, murderous regime in Saudi Arabia, a regime which does not respect democracy, which does not respect human rights, a regime whose leader was involved in the horrific murder of dissident journalist Jamal Khashoggi in the Saudi consulate in Turkey. I should add that in the midst of this horrific tragedy in Yemen, there is some good news. In December, the UN Special Envoy for Yemen, Martin Griffiths, was able to achieve a ceasefire agreement enabling humanitarian aid to be delivered. We know that action, the action by the United States Congress in calling for an end to our involvement in that war, played a key role in pushing the Saudi coalition into that ceasefire agreement. Currently, that ceasefire is in danger of breaking down, so it is essential that the House and the Senate act and act very soon. Today, we come together to reintroduce the same resolution that has already passed the Senate, and I am confident will pass the House.
Whatever the outcome of this effort, we need BDS against Saudi Arabia. More about this next week. The Yellow Vest protests in France continue week after week. Now to lighten things up, a trip to Hartford and its Wadsworth Athenium. They were having an exhibit on watercolors. This is a hopper. Extraordinary colors in this portrait. This is by the Chinese artist Ah Weiwei. Wooden chairs as they used to make them in China before the move to mass-produce plastic chairs. This is not from ancient Egypt. It's from a rich British home of the 19th century, probably an umbrella stand. A detail from an extraordinary modern portrait. And the museum is increasingly getting it on colonialism and racism, instead of the usual fawning description of this Remington portrait of a U.S. cavalryman. The picture alludes to the fact that the Indians may not have been the aggressor. Finally, on that warm day when the polar vortex departed from New England, a short trip to Southford Falls, still half iced over. First noticed on March 26th, anti-nuclear activist Frida Berrigan will be coming to New Haven to deliver the Schaefer Lecture. That's our program for today. See you next week at this time. I'm Stanley Heller for The Struggle.